Well, it is 11:30, so I know many of you are joining us today on your lunch break. So thank you. It's so great to see you. We still are going to continue to do as many of these virtual either lunch and learns, or maybe one of these upcoming sessions we'll switch it up and do a breakfast and learn as frequently as possible, so that you all are getting the maximum benefits out of your Credit Union Marketing Council membership. Plus, it's just a great opportunity for us to network and learn more, especially in a year like 2020. I am going to turn it over to our presenter, Marnie Grumbach. I have the good fortune of serving with Marnie on the Maine Public Relations Council. So I am deeply appreciative of her time today and coming on. Before I pass it on to her, I do want to just read her bio. Marnie is the founder of Fluent IMC, a Southern Maine firm specializing in professional services, marketing, and communications. Her clients include businesses spanning banking, finance, consulting, law, technology, and healthcare. Marnie is a member of the Maine Public Relations Council Board of Directors and the Associated Builders and Contractors of Maine. She's a Husson University graduate, and she got her BA in communications from Elizabethtown College. So sorry, I had to read that. I didn't memorize it.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Has anyone heard of Elizabethtown College amongst this group? Probably not.
Is that in Pennsylvania?
It is, yes. And occasionally, once in a blue moon, I'll meet someone in Maine who went to E-Town, and I met my husband at E-Town. So we are pretty much, we don't keep in touch with any other alums other than ourselves. So, you know, we don't have to travel for homecoming. We just, it's just us.
Excellent.
But, yeah.
Excellent. Well, without further ado, Marnie, thank you for joining us. I'm going to put myself on mute and look forward to hearing your presentation.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Tim. Thank you to all of you as members of the I had not heard of the Maine Credit Union Marketing Council until Jen made me aware and invited me. So it's great to be with you today. I really appreciate being invited and to have time to talk with you. And I just also want to thank you for scheduling this in October. You know, this really is the perfect time to be having this conversation. And I really feel strongly about that because, you know, as a marketing professional and as an agency, we spend a lot of time talking about strategy and planning. So this time of the year is really, really important as you're planning for next year and budgeting, as you all know. So this topic is very timely. So I really appreciate, you know, you making it happen. And I think that, you know, it's obvious that it's been a crazy year. We've all had to adapt. We've all had to make changes to our marketing programs in 2020. And, you know, we didn't have the luxury of planning any of those things. We had to pivot and adapt and make changes very dramatically. It's been a very difficult year of, you know, figuring out how to rework your marketing and communications and serve your members and customers and clients. So it's also, you know, with that in mind, a really good time to be thinking about what is your new normal and how can you plan for 2021 with some of these lessons that we've learned this year, and just recognizing that some of these things are going to be with us for a while, if not forever. So the timing is great. So I also just, you know, wanted to say that, you know, in times of crisis, I've seen in my career, whether it's, you know, an economic crisis, it's sometimes organizations just feel like marketing is that thing that can be scrapped. And I think in this particular situation, you know, there's never been a year where we really need to be resourceful and really be smart about our marketing budgets and really not go silent, because your members need you, they need your mission. And so I just feel strongly that it's not the year to pull back, but obviously there are often budget constraints. And so it's the year to be planning and extra smart. So I also just wanted to, and the quote I have to share is, you know, your brand is the single most important investment you can make in your business, whether you're in a pandemic or not, in a crisis or not. As a marketer, I just feel really strongly about that. So just wanted to kick it off with that. And then I wanted to give a little bit of background before we get into our reasons why for conducting a marketing audit, just why we as an agency feel so strongly about auditing as part of a marketing planning process. The first reason is because, I've been on your side, I've been in-house before I was on the agency side. And of course, every year Q4 would roll around and we would look at our planning for the next year. And I was in the legal marketing industry for about a decade in an in-house position in a marketing department. And one of the things that we didn't do it every year, but we did it a couple of times in my time there, and it's common in that space, is to have a third party conduct client interviews where they actually interview top clients of the law firm to just get their direct feedback. And it was usually done through phone calls. And now I'm sure they're using video conferencing as we are, but that just awareness of the value of what we learned from a handful of really honest client feedback was so valuable to our planning. And then when I launched Fluent, I came over to the agency side and working with our clients. When we start working with someone, that immersion and discovery is absolutely necessary. And we care about the strategy so much that the audit piece is our first logical step. So we were doing these audits and then realized that there were situations and organizations that could really benefit from what we were learning from that first step, even if they didn't need an agency like us to do their annual marketing plan or work with them on an ongoing basis, that they could really see the value of an audit, whether we helped them with that or they did it themselves. So I just feel strongly about the value of a marketing audit and kind of wanted to give the background of that. In realizing the value of an audit and what it teaches us, I've just seen time and time again how valuable it is to take that extra step. And I just feel really strongly about that. And I can think of several different scenarios where we've gone to kickoff sessions for audits and clients will sit around the table and say something like, when I ask, which of your services do you think you're best known for? And they'll answer and indicate one service. And then we get to the point of doing the interviews, and that client or stakeholder that we're interviewing answers something totally different. So we start seeing these issues with gaps in their messaging or their reputation. We've seen that happen several times. We've also just seen the value in taking that time to collect all of your marketing and branding materials and literally lay them all out on the table. That doesn't always happen unless you are forcing yourself to do it. And so when we are doing it, we have to pull all of that from the client. So it's a great opportunity to, we've seen situations where a company will have salespeople using outdated flyers and somebody else is using a different PowerPoint slide deck. There's just total sort of chaos amongst their brand materials that they didn't really realize had gotten as bad as until we laid it out there. And then, we've seen more recently clients that were doing a really good job with their social media content and felt really strongly about sharing content about their community members. And then when we did the interviews, we learned that their audiences just didn't really understand what they did, the products and services that they provided, because they were actually being a little bit too modest in their content that they were sharing. So time and time again, we see these issues that pop up. And the value is that, we took the time to ask. So I just kind of wanted to kick it off with that. So why conduct a marketing audit? It's, like I said, opportunity to see what's working and what's not. It allows you to gather feedback from an objective professional, whether that's a third party that you hire or whether you designate a separate team internally to focus on this. And it reveals insights that can act as building blocks for a strong foundation for your future marketing or communications efforts. So let's dig into this a little bit deeper. We already went over some of the whys, and I think big picture, the reason for doing this is to reveal. And you as marketers are really keepers of your brand. And the other reason I think it's so valuable is because, you know, when we come up with marketing strategies, it's sometimes really hard to be objective about an idea that I came up with. You know, to have an outside person give me feedback is really valuable. So when to think about conducting a marketing audit? We talked about the timing of Q4 being great timing, but you know, I really believe that any time you can audit and take this step is better than never. But certainly before planning your next big marketing or advertising campaign, it's a great first step to make sure that you're, you know, really understanding what you need to prioritize in your marketing strategy. And to determine what aspects you've been doing in the past that are having the most impact. If you're thinking about a rebrand or a brand refresh next year, you absolutely need to be thinking about an audit. Any branding agency that you might engage would have probably their own unique process, but there would be a lot of similarities to what I'm talking about today. If you're thinking about overhauling your website in a significant way, that's another great reason to go through this process and dig a little deeper into the online parts of it that we're going to talk about. And then just during budgeting season to just get ready for next year and have a solid strategy in place. Are there any questions before I start talking about the different components? No? Okay. So what does a marketing audit look like? Basically, when we build these audits, they typically are about a 4 to 6 week time frame. But I just want everyone to understand that these are really scalable and customizable. So you could do it, especially if you're doing it in-house, you could probably be more efficient than that. But usually it takes that long just with scheduling the interviews and gathering all the materials. And then we organize these by these major components. So we do a positioning review where we're looking at your brand positioning. We do stakeholder and audience interviews or surveys. We do a competitor analysis. We look at your online presence. We look at your existing marketing or communications plan, and then we pull all of that together into a written findings report. So I like to do them as slide decks, and most of them end up being about 45 slides long, which sounds insane, but with anything marketing or branding, as you all know, there's so many visual elements that I think it's nice to have slide by slide. You can organize the categories. I do a lot of screen grabs. And then if you, want to present this to an internal team, you have it ready to go as a presentation. We certainly can do it as a written, Word document, but with all the visual pieces, I like doing it as a slide deck. So the first thing we do is we schedule a kickoff session. And this is just a checklist that you could actually use. When you're setting up your kickoff meeting, you obviously need to identify who is on your committee or team, schedule that kickoff meeting. For us, they usually take about an hour and a half or 2 hours. And that's a meeting where we are almost just really going through a discovery process, just kind of talking about everything related to your marketing program and your branding, really getting the background. And I think if you're doing it internally yourself, you would just be having that, really honest conversations with the team about where you're at, where you want to be. The next thing we do is we create a list of all of the existing brand collateral that we need to assess during the audit and make sure that we have access to all online accounts. During that same kickoff meeting, we have the organization identify their key audiences. So, we'll talk about this in more detail in a minute when we talk about the interviews, but you want to identify who you want to reach out to for more information and, make sure you have their contact information, but just getting organized there. And begin writing some interview and survey questions and consider segmentation of the questions based on your different audiences. And we also, during a kickoff, ask the client to think about their top 3 or 4 competitors and make a list of their brand elements that we want to make sure that we look at during the audit. So their website, any online advertising that they're doing that you can find, Google reviews, and on the PR side, we look at share of voice. So those are just sort of the initial first steps to kicking this off and getting organized at the very beginning of an audit. So the positioning review, this is where we look at all of your branding and external materials. So these are, your brand identity, your logo, your identity materials, your stationery. We're looking at your brand positioning. Do you have key messages or a tagline or slogan that you've been using that's central to your marketing program? Sometimes clients have more than one or several in circulation. So it's good to really have a sense of, what are you saying? What are your key messages? We also look at all of your sales materials. So, if you're using direct mail, if you're using, flyers or slicks for different products, brochures, rack cards, all of those brand materials are important to pull together, the tangible materials. Member communications. So if you put out quarterly or monthly member newsletters, your annual report, we pull all of that. Your advertising. So all of your print ads, all of your digital display ads, your radio and TV ads, if you're running them, we get all of those files. So we're collecting all of this inventory of brand materials that you have in circulation. So I want to just show, this is kind of a client, this is an example of a client that we did an audit for recently. Again, pulling all of these materials together. We'll talk a lot more about looking at their web presence, but in the positioning review, we obviously look at the website for that messaging, and then we look at online presence a little bit more detailed, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Okay. So, I think the goal with a positioning review is to just, again, reveal any areas that might be causing confusion or mistrust with your audience. Are there positioning issues that could be hindering your success? Has your messaging evolved over time? And what I like to advise clients is, if you could ensure that your audience remembers 1 or 2 things after looking at your materials, what are those 1 or 2 things? So, keeping that in mind. And then the other thing is, when you're in this process, in this phase of collecting, you're not solving problems right now. You're just gathering everything, reviewing it. The solving comes at the end. And when you start working on your strategy, this is revealing and awareness and getting organized. Just want to stress that. Of course, as marketers, you're going to have ideas that start bubbling up. Oh, we need to fix that. We need to do this. You're probably right, but just remember that that'll come a little bit later. Okay, so this is a good time to talk about the next step, which is the stakeholder interviews. And, I think that it's one thing to review your entire program that you may have created or your team did, but I just really believe in the power of asking others and just being sort of humble about it and getting that outside input. The other thing I want to share, and maybe some of you have done this for your credit unions, is that, we are not a market research firm. What I'm talking about today is not market research. Market research is really about collecting large amounts of data that you use to help you understand the size of your market, your competition. It's really about understanding your prospects and their purchasing power. So the focus of market research is more on the prospect and not as much on you. And marketing research, it's all about understanding various aspects of your marketing and advertising technique. So there's certainly overlap, but I just want to stress that in this audit process, we're really looking at the quality of the feedback and not the quantity of data. But I will say, you know, if you have something like a really huge strategy shift coming, and you have the resources to conduct market research, it's absolutely valuable and wonderful to add into this process. But typically, when we are doing these interviews, it is a smaller amount of feedback from really key audiences. So I talked about this in the kickoff checklist, but you want to determine who are your key audiences. So do you have, you know, centers of influence or referral sources for your credit union? Do you have community stakeholders? A lot of times, especially with a rebrand, if you're thinking about a rebrand, your internal audiences are going to be really important, because branding is all about living your brand from the inside out. So interviewing your own employees to get their feeling about your brand is very valuable. And then, of course, your members, and you may want to segment those by personal banking products and business. So it's making a list of those key categories within your audience that you want to hear from. Typically, for the one-to-one interviews that we do either by phone or by video, we do about 10. So it's usually like 2 or 3 per category. And then for larger groups, we usually just use an online survey tool like SurveyMonkey. And another tip is, if you're doing the one-to-one interviews and you're not using a third party, if you're doing this yourself, have somebody from your administrative team or marketing team do this. Don't have like a lender or someone that has a direct relationship with the person, because they're not as apt to be honest. It can get very awkward if they want to give constructive criticism, and people just sort of have that human nature. You want to be nice, you don't want to hurt their feelings, but you really want to get honest feedback. And that's one of the things that we found back in my law firm days, is that we just got much more honest feedback when we had a stranger talking to them, you know, a third party consultant, rather than the lawyer themselves. So something to think about when you're thinking about your, you know, your team and your resources for executing this. And then for the larger groups, if you're going to do an online survey, you know, well, actually back to the one-to-one, just some sample questions. I like to come up with maybe 5 or 6 questions. It's usually about a 15-minute phone call. Sometimes people really get talking and it takes longer, but you don't want to take up too much of their time, but you want to queue up questions so that you're almost guiding them through a SWOT analysis, just like you would internally. So if I use Maine Credit Union League as an example, the questions might be something like, how did you meet or learn about Maine Credit Union League? How would you describe them to a colleague? What do you think their purpose is? What would you list as Maine Credit Union League's top strength or attribute? How do you think they differ from other industry groups that you've been involved with? Have you visited their website, and do you have feedback or recommend any changes? And in one word, if you could pick one word, what comes to mind when you think about Maine Credit Union League? So it's not a lot of questions, but they're open-ended. But if the conversation goes according to these questions, you could take those responses and put them in a SWOT analysis, and then do the same thing with your internal team and see how that, you know, see if there's a gap or see if there's, you know, alignment. So that's just kind of some thoughts about questions. And then similar questions for the online survey, but it can be a tiny bit longer. I'm trying to remember the last one. Emily, maybe you could chime in about how many questions we had. I want to say it was like a 1 to 2 minute survey that people were able to take. Yep. Not a lot of open-ended questions, because it's harder to tally large amounts of feedback.
It is, and the answers that you get might vary. So if people interpret questions differently than you intended, which, you know, you try to write them and feel like you're being pretty straightforward, and we still, if it's not a, you know, multiple choice or yes or no, or, you know, something like that, you will get all sorts of different answers.
Right. Thank you. By the way, this is Emily Broadbent, my colleague at Fluent. So thank you. So just some, things that tips and tricks for, getting your surveys and interview questions in order. And then, the process of reviewing all of it, we really tell clients, we're going to give you a transcript of everything. So that if you want to sit down and read every single response, we'll give it to you. But in the actual written findings report of the audit, we're going to pull out the highlights, the things that we as an objective, other third-party marketing professionals, we feel that these are the highlights of what you need to hear. A lot of times it's things like literally bubbles like this with quotes. We might have 4 or 5 different slides. We categorize it by the segments that we talked about before. And often there's something, not necessarily horrible, but something worth knowing about. We've heard, I love this organization, but what's really missing from their services offered is this thing, or this particular feature is the biggest benefit of my membership. I wish they would do more of this. So we actually, and I'm protecting all of our clients and the feedback here, generalizing, but we actually provide slides with the highlighted quotes that we feel you need to really know about. Any questions about the interviewing process or anything so far? Keep going. Okay.
I have one question, Marnie.
Sure.
As you're doing the interviewing process, has it changed at all as a result of COVID? I mean, you're asking different questions. Do you specifically ask about the interviewees about how COVID has affected their relationship with an organization or changed their attitudes or anything like that? Do you go specifically into that at this point?
To be honest with you, the one that we completed wrapped up right before COVID. And that was the most, we haven't done one exactly like this, but I will say for all of our ongoing clients, we do sort of a refresher of this before we do their strategy for next year. So we're going to be doing some of this in the next month or so. And I do think that we should be customizing our questions, especially if you feel that there might be a trouble spot. So if there's something that you had to change that's impacting your members and you really want to understand how they feel about it, I think you should absolutely, I wouldn't make the whole survey geared toward COVID, but I would weave in a few, assuming that, you want to hear how they feel about it so that you can work that into your plan for next year. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, as I know, because, in this industry, people are thinking more about, they think about their credit unions, they're factoring in sort of the current pandemic situation because they're not thinking as much about in-branch, and they're thinking a lot about digital services and those types of things. And so as we are, starting our own research about attitudes toward credit unions, we're pulling in everything we know about or pulling in COVID as part of the discussion to see how it has affected people's attitudes. And whether those are temporary or permanent changes to
right. Yeah, I mean, I would think that if you are quite sure that your members are going to rely upon online financial tools in a way that they maybe did somewhat before, but they really need them now, just understanding their perceptions about that, and maybe a few extra questions about your online presence and website could really be valuable if you're going to be going through a survey process. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Okay, so the next category is the competitor review. And this is really an opportunity to look at your key competitors' brands and any readily available marketing materials that you can find. We typically look at 3 competitors. I think any more than 4, and it's going to become very overwhelming. So I usually recommend that you pick 3, maybe 4, if there's really one that you want to add to that. And so, you're really reviewing their materials to just get a better understanding of their strategy and to use these findings as a basis to differentiate from them. So this is kind of an example of one. We do public relations on an ongoing basis for Machias Savings Bank. And so every year, when we first started working with them, we did a very thorough audit. And then, as I said, we kind of refresh it every year. But they gave us these three competitor, they consider these to be similar sized community banks. So we were really looking at using some of our PR tools. What are the key messages that these other community banks are putting out? We were able to use our PR software to look at media coverage. So again, this was very PR focused, but it's just kind of a nice benchmark to see, okay, in the community banking space, these are their key messages, this is what we're seeing in most of their materials, and this is where they're at for media coverage. So that was, again, very PR focused, but just kind of, we literally create columns so you can see side by side the feedback there. And then, beyond that, we, like I said, I like doing a slide deck because I like to pull screen grabs of all the advertising I can find that competitors are doing, just very visual, if there are certain parts of their website that I think are interesting or the clients should see. So it's really collecting visuals as we go. So you're collecting all of that competitor information. You'll probably have a lot of information there. And then, I think that I had I'll talk about that a little bit more in our online presence. But, basically, you want to be looking at their advertising if you can find it. You want to be looking at their online presence. You can use some different tools that we'll talk about in a second to figure out if you think they're doing Google AdWords or more targeted advertising. If you have access to any of their newsletters or direct mail. So trying to get as much of that as you can. Sometimes it's hard. So the next section is your online presence. And this is pretty, obviously we're all relying on our digital presence and digital tools for our marketing and branding. So we spend a lot of time in this section. And again, especially if you are doing something, if you're conducting this audit because you think you're going to be doing a website overhaul next year, you're going to want to spend even more time here. When we're doing an audit to get ready for a strategy or a plan that's more just for an annual plan, we spend time here, but it's not quite as in-depth as when we do one specifically getting ready to do a website project. So, I think you want to take a look at your website, your brand positioning and how that's coming through, especially on the homepage of your website, any special landing pages that you've been using. I think in your space, any online financial tools that you've been trying to make accessible to your members or prospective members, to really be looking at those web content elements. If you're doing online advertising, it's really important to be looking at, what does that creative look like? So just pulling all of these things. And again, you're not solving problems right now, you're just organizing and reviewing. And then you're really looking for consistency across your channels. And, obviously you want to include your social media channels in there as well. And looking at your analytics as well. So I have a checklist that will make it a little bit easier. If you're using Google Analytics, you can pull a report either year to date or monthly or quarterly and take a look at that. Looking at your Google My Business page, any Google reviews that might be an issue. And for social media, I like to look at the overall tone and approach of your organic content versus your paid advertising if you're running paid ads on Facebook or Instagram. So this is kind of a checklist that you can use looking at your Google Analytics report for your web traffic, popular pages, looking at referring sites, where you're getting traffic from, just any other website performance insights that are valuable. But assume that you're, just in the credit union space, your branch locations and your, geographic location is so important to your marketing. So making sure that your Google My Business page is up to date for your locations and your business details and any Google reviews. Pulling any digital advertising from Facebook or Google AdWords if you've been running campaigns on these platforms. You can actually do the same for your competitors. If you want to see what they're doing on Facebook, you can go and look at page ad transparency. They're doing, what they have going on. And then a couple of tools that I had mentioned before that are, again, a good starting point. You can use SEMrush or builtwith.com to identify competitors' keywords and just kind of get a sense of their advertising activity to see if they have any tracking pixels in place. Just kind of gives you a sense of, what they have in place for digital advertising. So this is just a sample Google Analytics report. And then I think, another easy thing to do as part of this audit is really look at, the keywords that are important to your credit union. Do some test searches. So I did a couple the other day, just looking at, credit unions near me. What do I get for, search results? I think I searched auto loans with low interest rate to see, just how are you ranking? How are your competitors ranking? So if you're not actively running digital advertising campaigns, but you're just, trying to optimize your website, it's just helpful to have a sense of how you're ranking organically for those search terms. So that's pretty much, I think I've covered pretty much everything for the online, but we can, talk about that more in Q&A. And then we start moving into the phase where we are starting to solve some problems or attempting to solve some problems by making recommendations. So as part of our slide deck, we have a section on recommendations. This is just a sample from another audit we did, kept the client confidential, but after looking through all of the findings from the interviews and from the competitor analysis and all of these things, these were high-level recommendations that we took back to the client and had a conversation about these things. So there was a need to develop stronger key messages that aligned with their goals, to position around their strongest differentiators, that they were self-performing and had strong leadership, that we were recommending a refreshed tagline or a campaign centered around one key positioning attribute that they could use consistently across multiple channels. We recommended that they refresh some of their marketing collateral that they were taking to really important pitch meetings and some of their online presence to support their business development efforts. And, we recommended that they really, beef up their boots on the ground effort by pursuing new partnerships with trade associations. So that's just kind of a snapshot of how we like to approach recommendations as part of the audit written report. So again, you're getting to the end of this process, you're collecting all of these things, you're reviewing, you're pulling out the highlights, you're figuring out trouble spots, and working on this written findings report. And it's really a comprehensive overview, a final deliverable that you can bring back to your senior leadership team or to your marketing team. For us, if we're conducting these, it's our outsider expert recommendations that we're bringing back to you. And then, another part of this is taking the audit findings and looking at your marketing plan. So looking at your 2020 marketing plan and lining that up against what you learned in your audit process. Is your current plan working? Can you assess your current efforts and review a lot of these findings to just see what's really effective? Maybe your goals have changed. And, as Tim mentioned, obviously our situation has changed this year. So likely some of your goals are going to be changing for next year. So what did you hear? What did you hear during the audit process? What did you see? How can you tweak your marketing plan to address those issues? And looking back at, tactics, every single tactic that you had in place last year, how can you tweak those with all of this information in mind? So, prioritizing, making necessary adjustments, and just, sounds kind of corny, but, just feeling confident that you've really done the work to really have a good understanding of where your marketing program exists in the current space, your credit union's current reality, so that you can maximize your budget and your team and feel confident about that. So final checklist that you guys can use is, I talked about some of this already, but turning some of that feedback from those stakeholder interviews into action items, considering how you might leverage existing top traffic sources based on a review of website analytics, looking at that competitor analysis to make your company stand out, and just really being actionable about your marketing plan. That's the process that we go through. Again, I just want to stress that this is really scalable. You can adjust the number of interviews you do. You can adjust the number of competitors. You can, customize it for you, and then move into strategy phase and creating your marketing plan for next year. So that's what I have for you. You've listened to me talk for 45 minutes about conducting a marketing audit. So are there any questions?
Questions from the group? This is normally a chatty group. So I have one question, but hopefully others will chime in. So I'm going to go ahead and be the first one to jump in. Hopefully others will follow. Marnie, a lot of our credit unions, well, all of our credit unions are heavily engaged in their communities, whether it's sponsorships of food pantries or Little League teams. I mean, you name it, we are community. And so is it important, since not all credit unions, this isn't the case for, but some of those sponsorships come from marketing dollars. Is that important to look at when you're doing your assessments for an audit, where you're spending your sponsorship money, and maybe perhaps where your competitors are, what your competitors are doing in this community space?
I think so. I think that when I think about customizing an audit so that it's really valuable for you, if you know that that is a really important area, then I would absolutely work it into this. I think that I'm just trying to think of other clients that have similar situations in terms of, you're talking about the dollar amount that you are donating through sponsorships, more about that than you are. I mean, I think that, that would probably fall under the reviewing last year's marketing plan and looking at, where were we prioritizing the use of our budget? Maybe given all of these things that we've learned through this audit, this is a year that we either need to beef this up or change it or tweak it. So I would work it into your initial checklist of things to make sure that you're looking at. And it sounds like it would be less of a visual audit and more of a looking at that budget piece of your previous marketing plan. But I would absolutely look at it as part of this process.
Thank you. Can I add something, Marnie?
Yeah.
I think that also would be one that would be really interesting to add into the survey that you might do, is to, again, have a checkbox, or I know that this is actually an open-ended question that we had for a client recently, is asking what programs or organizations do you think that we're associated with? And that I think can be really valuable feedback to see. So like you may be investing in several of these opportunities, but which ones are people really making note of and which ones have the most visibility?
Yeah, that's a great idea. I have worked with banking clients in the past who have come to a point where they felt that on the community sponsorship side, they had to really focus and they had to really get to a point where they identified one or two key areas that they were going to focus on, like food insecurity or education, something like that, so that they kind of had a benchmark for saying yes and no to sponsorship requests that came from community members. So I think if you know that that's a really important piece, then yeah, I think that's a great idea, working it into the surveys to see what your audience feels about it, and then considering, is there a way to tweak this and maybe focus?
Other questions from the group? You guys are way too quiet.
Question.
Has anyone been through this process before in any iteration? Like during a branding process or a website process, like anything similar to this?
Okay, I'll chime in on this one. Yes, we have. Probably about 3 years ago. I didn't have a say in the audit company. So the audit company at the time was coming out of Texas, I believe. And I want to say maybe about 40% of what they gave me was probably some of their ideas, which were really great ideas. The other 60% of the audit was exactly what I told them. So we weren't too far off the mark. Some of the ideas that they gave us didn't really work in such a rural area that I'm in. I don't think they realized how rural we were here in northern Maine. So, you know, it was not feasible for us to follow those guidelines, but it helped with our branding. You know, I did a brand guidebook and, you know, got our staff on the same wavelength as far as how we should look, how we should be branded, how we should sound. So that was helpful. At the end of the day, it was a good experience, mostly.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen this process not bring up something that is maybe a little tough to learn about the organization. You know, nothing awful, but you know, it's you know, just being really real about the feedback and figuring out, like you said, what is realistic for us in our market to implement. So you have to take that information and then use your own expertise and judgment for your credit union and your market and go from there.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think if they would have been a little bit more northeast based, like yourself, or whatever, instead of southern based, it probably would have made a better impact or more of a, yeah, because it was out there for us. It was kind of not, yeah, some of it was, yeah. I'm just being nice.
Do your credit unions routinely conduct market research?
Are you asking me?
Just the whole group.
Oh.
Yeah. I'm curious if that was part of it. Like if their audit was more of a market research data, and I'm talking more about, you know, one-to-one interviews and sort of the quality of the feedback. But I am curious how many of you have conducted market research.
Not sure.
and
Marnie,
whether it was valuable,
Marnie, I will say that the league has done some market research, and so we've done some research on attitudes toward credit unions and what people think about in terms of either credit unions or banking in general and that sort of thing. And we are actually we're going to do another one of those after, probably starting in sometime in November. And we'll be sharing those results with everybody. But it really is trying to get into sort of deep market research as to what people's attitudes are, at least, toward credit unions and banking in general. And we will be factoring into that how attitudes have shifted, thinking has shifted as a result of COVID-19. Because we do think that there has been some shifting of the way people are perceiving their finances and managing their finances as a result of the pandemic. But I don't know if any individual credit unions have done that kind of market research, but we're certainly have done it and we'll be doing it again.
Great.
Marnie, I have a couple of questions. What is the length? What is the process? How long does the whole process take? And can you give us a range of cost, whereas we're all in budgeting right now? And it probably has to do with the size of the credit union and the depth and all of that.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so I'll actually just base it off of the most recent one that we did, which was for a nonprofit. And they had a budget of $5,000, and we were able to go through all of these categories that I talked about. I think we did 8 or 10 one-to-one interviews. We did an online survey, and we did a communication strategy for them as well. And I think it took us about 8 to 10 weeks to get through the whole thing. But Emily, maybe you can help me remember. I feel like we extended the timing of the online survey at one point and gave it extra time. So I think that, 6 to 8 weeks is usually what you need to get through all of this. I don't know if that helps you on the budgeting side. Again, it's very customizable, but for the depth of what we were doing for them, and then actually took it to the next step and recommended and built a strategy for them, they had a budget of $5,000 for that whole process.
That's helpful.
Thank you.
Sure. Emily, am I right about the timing? I hope.
Yeah,
I think that's why I remember
was
that.
going to chime in and say, so that the timing of that one was a little bit odd because it was in May, and we were specifically hoping to interview some people who worked at colleges, and it was at the point where the colleges were kind of figuring out next steps. So we had some of those COVID circumstances that we were working around, but I think typically it would have gone a little bit more quickly.
Right, thanks.
Marnie, can I ask if credit unions are interested in surveying members, which I think is such a great idea, to get that feedback? Is there, good timing? It sounds silly, but is there a good time of day to reach to somebody? Do you call these folks if you're your members? Do you call them after dinner? Do you call them during the day? Is there a secret sauce for reaching out to people without being intrusive?
So, for the one-to-ones that we did by phone or video conference, those are typically the people who are on the more business side. So we were typically doing that within 9 to 5 hours. For clients that wanted to survey a larger group of their customers, that's where we ended up doing online surveys. Okay. So we weren't doing the phone calls and the video conferencing for them. I think that, like Emily said, you're thinking about who this audience is that you're trying to survey, some of the nuances of that. think we ended up using Facebook a lot for that particular client, and also some other community affiliates to just raise awareness. But again, they're a different type of organization. They're a, they have a client list, but they also have a lot of community partners. So I think that you'd be thinking more about seasonality with that. So not getting it too close to the holidays, or, not right around the election, which is coming right up in a couple weeks anyway. But that's what comes to mind for me when thinking about distributing an online survey. Is this something that you typically do, like member experience, member satisfaction type interviews anyway?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak for our credit union marketers, and I'll let the group chime in, but yeah, absolutely. And we're always looking as part of our overall marketing efforts. We try to get member stories too. So in our advertising, in our statewide awareness campaign for Maine's credit unions in general, we are pivoting and we are using real life member stories, those true testimonials. So, and we're constantly trying to, get those from credit unions across Maine, just because it's so nice to put real live people to stories that demonstrate how credit unions have improved the financial lives of their members, whether it was an emergency loan or a car loan or business. We're really trying to capture that. So, those direct engagements are, is really important. So I'll definitely quiet and let others chime in, but I think that's key.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I'm just curious which communication channel is the most effective for getting them to complete the survey. Is it email? Is it social media? Is it both? Is it, so I'm just curious what has been effective for gathering that input.
I think kind of along those lines too, if you do send out email newsletters or surveys or any of these types of things, maybe look at when you have the best results for sending emails. So if you know, like, oh, Tuesday mornings is when we have the highest open rates for emails. And certainly with something like this, you probably want to push it out a few times. So leave the survey open for 2 weeks or so and promote it on a few different channels. I think with social media, you'd maybe want to be mindful that if you specifically want to speak to your members, that's, maybe use the channels that will reach them. Yeah, there are a lot of different ways to go about it depending on who you want to reach.
All right, we are coming up on 12:30. I don't want to cut off discussion, but I certainly want to be mindful that a lot of you are taking your lunch hours to share your time with us. Are there any additional questions that you would like to ask Marnie and Emily? Emily, thank you for joining too and providing your input. I've got, Marnie, a lot of folks have come through the chat asking for copies of the presentation so they can take the checklist. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I will provide you with the PDF, and if you want to send it out to everyone, that would be great. Yeah,
that's excellent.
Great. Well, thank you. It was fun. We always enjoy talking about this kind of thing. So thank you for having me today.
Well, I appreciate your time. And thank you to everyone that joined today. I look forward to your feedback. This was incredibly valuable, from a league perspective. So I'm hoping the credit unions are receiving a lot from this, and I will get some information out to everyone shortly so that you can put some of this great info into practice. So Marnie, thank you. Emily, thank you too.
Yeah, thank you, Emily.
And everybody have a great day. We will hopefully reconvene another council workshop before the end of the year. So take care.
Great. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.